The father's face was purple with rage as he screamed inches from the black royal guard's face, his 3 children watching in horror. For 47 seconds, Guard Sergeant Jerome Patterson endured the racist tirade without flinching. Then his 6-year-old son did something that made his father stop mid-sentence, drop to his knees, and break down in tears. "Daddy, why are you being mean to someone who looks like me?" Before we witness how one innocent question shattered years of hidden prejudice and transformed 2 families forever, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because sometimes the most profound truths come from the smallest voices. Now, let's see what happens when a child's love conquers a father's hate. The morning had started like any other at Horse Guards Parade. Sergeant Jerome Patterson stood at his post, the weight of his bearskin cap familiar after 12 years of service. At 38, he was one of the most decorated guards in the regiment, with 3 tours in Afghanistan and a chest full of medals hidden beneath his scarlet tunic. But none of that prepared him for what would unfold in the next hour. Robert Stevens arrived with his 3 children at precisely 10:47 a.m. A successful investment banker from Surrey, he'd promised his kids a proper British experience during their half-term break. His twin daughters, Emma and Sophia, both 8, held his hands while 6-year-old Marcus ran ahead, his excitement infectious. "Stay close, Marcus," Stevens called out, his tone already edged with the stress that seemed to follow him from the trading floor. "And remember what I told you about not touching anything." Patterson noticed them immediately. His training demanded constant awareness, but it was Marcus who caught his attention. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder, taking in the pageantry with the pure joy only children possess. What Patterson also noticed, with the practiced eye of someone who'd faced prejudice his entire career, was the contrast. Marcus was black, adopted into the Stevens family 3 years earlier, though Patterson didn't know this yet. "Look at the tall soldier," Marcus exclaimed, pointing at Patterson. "He's like me!" Stevens' jaw tightened. It was subtle, but Patterson caught it. He'd seen that look before, the discomfort of parents when their children pointed out racial similarities they'd rather not acknowledge. "He's not a soldier, he's a guard," Stevens corrected sharply. "And he's nothing like—" "Just watch quietly, Marcus." The twins exchanged glances. Even at 8, they sensed their father's mood shifting, the storm clouds gathering. They'd witnessed his outbursts before, at restaurants when service was slow, at their school when a teacher dared suggest Marcus might need extra support. But this felt different. Patterson maintained his 1,000-yard stare, but his peripheral vision tracked every movement. Years of combat had taught him to sense danger, and something about Stevens' body language set off every alarm. "Daddy, can we take a picture?" Sophia asked tentatively. "Of course," Stevens replied, his voice artificially bright. He positioned the children in front of Patterson, but his eyes kept drifting to the guard's face with growing hostility. "You know," Stevens said loudly, addressing no one in particular, but ensuring everyone nearby could hear, "it used to mean something, being a Queen's Guard. Standards, tradition, proper British heritage." A group of American tourists shifted uncomfortably and moved away. An elderly British couple shook their heads disapprovingly, but said nothing. Marcus, oblivious to the undertone, continued staring up at Patterson in awe. "Now look at it," Stevens continued, his voice rising. "Diversity quotas, political correctness gone mad. They'll let anyone play dress-up now." "Robert!" a woman's voice called sharply. Patterson's eyes flicked briefly to see a well-dressed woman approaching quickly. Mrs. Stevens, he presumed, returning from the gift shop. "What are you doing?" "Just educating the children about history, Helen," Stevens replied, but his eyes never left Patterson's face, about how things used to be, before all this change. Helen Stevens was a pediatric nurse who'd spent years advocating for Marcus's adoption. She recognized the signs immediately, her husband's flushed face, the vein pulsing at his temple, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. She'd been managing his episodes for years, but they'd gotten worse since Marcus joined their family. "Let's go," she said firmly, reaching for the twins' hands. "No." Stevens stepped closer to Patterson, close enough that the guard could smell the coffee on his breath, see the red veins in his eyes from another sleepless night trading global markets. "I want him to know. I want him to understand what he represents." Patterson had endured worse. In Helmand Province, he'd been spat on by insurgents. He'd been called every slur imaginable by those who saw his uniform before his humanity. But something about this moment, the children watching, the pain in Marcus's confused eyes, made it harder to maintain his discipline. "You're everything wrong with this country," Stevens hissed, his face now inches from Patterson's. "Forced diversity, quotas, taking positions meant for real British men. My taxes pay for this charade." That's when the 47 seconds began. Stevens unleashed a tirade that would later be viewed over 50 million times on social media. Tourists filmed as he ranted about immigration, about them taking over, about the erosion of British values. His face grew redder with each word, spittle flying as his voice crescendoed. The twins were crying now, clinging to their mother. But Marcus stood frozen, his 6-year-old mind trying to process why his daddy was so angry at the nice guard who looked like him. Patterson never moved, not when Stevens questioned his right to wear the uniform, not when he suggested Patterson probably couldn't even speak proper English, not when he made assumptions about Patterson's intelligence, his background, his worth as a human being. 47 seconds of pure, unleashed prejudice, witnessed by dozens, recorded by many. And then Marcus moved. The little boy stepped between his father and Patterson, his small hand reaching up to touch his father's clenched fist. "Daddy," he said, his voice clear and confused, "why are you being mean to someone who looks like me?" The words hit Stevens like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. For the first time, he looked down at his son, really looked at him. Marcus's eyes, filled with tears, searched his father's face for an answer. "Do you hate me too?" Marcus whispered. The question shattered something inside Robert Stevens. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the cobblestones, pulling Marcus into his arms. The tears came then, years of suppressed guilt, unexamined prejudice, and the horrible realization of what he'd been teaching his son through his actions. "No, no, no!" Stevens sobbed, holding Marcus tight. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean—" Patterson broke protocol then, just slightly. His eyes moved down to meet Marcus's gaze, and in them, the boy saw not anger, but understanding. Patterson had been Marcus's age when he'd first experienced racism, when he'd first wondered why some people hated him for something he couldn't change. Helen Stevens knelt beside her husband, tears streaming down her face. The twins joined the embrace, and for a moment, the famous Horse Guards parade became the setting for a family's reckoning. "Sir," Patterson spoke for the first time, his voice gentle but carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded men in battle. "Your son asked you a question." Stevens looked up, his face blotchy with tears. I don't know. I don't know why. My father, his father, it's all I've ever—" He stopped, realizing how hollow the excuses sounded. "There is no why. There's no good reason." Marcus, with the wisdom children sometimes possess, patted his father's cheek. "The guard isn't mean. He's standing very still, even though you were shouty. That's brave." "Yes," Stevens whispered. "Yes, it is." What happened next would be shared in news outlets worldwide. Stevens stood slowly, helped by his wife, and faced Patterson directly. "Sergeant," he read Patterson's rank insignia correctly this time. "I apologize, not just for today, but for every time I've harbored these thoughts, spoken these words, perpetuated this poison. You've shown more dignity in these few minutes than I've shown in years." Patterson remained at attention, but his eyes conveyed acknowledgement. "Can you—" Stevens swallowed hard. "Can you forgive a fool who's just now learning to see?" Military protocol forbade Patterson from responding verbally while on duty. But Marcus, wonderful Marcus, understood something his father didn't. "He forgives you, Daddy," the boy said confidently. "That's what heroes do." The crowd that had gathered, a mixture of horrified tourists and supportive locals, began to applaud. Not for Stevens, but for Marcus, for Patterson, for the possibility of change witnessed in real time. Stevens spent the next several minutes speaking quietly to his children, explaining Daddy's big mistake, promising to do better, to be better. Helen watched with a mixture of relief and cautious hope. She'd waited years for this breakthrough. As the family prepared to leave, Marcus tugged on his father's hand. "Can I say goodbye to the guard?" Stevens nodded, lifting Marcus up. The boy leaned close to Patterson and whispered, "Thank you for being brave. When I grow up, I want to be brave like you." Patterson's eyes glistened, the only break in his composure. That afternoon, the video went viral with competing narratives. Some focused on Stevens' racist rant, calling for consequences. Others highlighted his breakdown and apology. But the clip that truly captured hearts was Marcus's simple question and its devastating impact. Stevens would later issue a public statement, taking full responsibility and pledging to undergo anti-racism education. He donated £50,000 to organizations fighting prejudice and began volunteering with his family at community integration programs. But the real change happened at home. Stevens sought therapy, confronting generational trauma and learned prejudices. He read books with Marcus about Black British heroes, attended cultural events he'd previously scorned, and most importantly, listened, really listened, when Marcus talked about his experiences. 3 months later, the Stevens family returned to Horse Guards Parade. Patterson was at his post, immaculate as ever. This time, Stevens approached with a letter, which he placed carefully at the base of Patterson's position. "It's from Marcus," he explained. "He wanted to thank you properly." Later, when Patterson's shift ended, he read the letter. In careful, 6-year-old handwriting, it said, "Dear Mr. Guard, thank you for showing my daddy that being different isn't bad. He reads me stories about brave people like you now. He says you're a hero. I think so too. Love, Marcus. P.S. Daddy cries happy tears now when he tells people about you." Patterson kept that letter in his uniform pocket for the rest of his service. The Stevens family transformation became a case study in reconciliation. Robert spoke at schools about the danger of inherited prejudice. Helen worked with adoption agencies to better prepare families for raising children of different ethnicities. The twins became fierce advocates for their brother, shutting down playground prejudice with the confidence of children who'd witnessed love triumph over hate. But it was Marcus who perhaps changed the most. The confused, hurt little boy grew into a confident young man who understood that his questions, simple, honest, and direct, had the power to change hearts. He'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing isn't standing still in the face of hatred, but asking why it exists in the first place. Years later, when Marcus Stevens graduated from university with a degree in social justice, 2 special guests attended the ceremony. His father, Robert, now a changed man who'd spent years undoing the damage of inherited prejudice, and Sergeant Major Jerome Patterson, retired, who'd answered a letter from a 6-year-old boy and become a family friend. In his graduation speech, Marcus said, "I learned at 6 years old that questions can be more powerful than statements, that love can overcome learned hatred, and that sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. To everyone fighting prejudice, whether standing guard against it or confronting it within yourself, remember that change is possible. My family is living proof." The applause was thunderous. Patterson and Stevens sat side by side, 2 men whose lives had intersected in a moment of ugliness, but had chosen to build something beautiful from it. They'd taught each other, through a child's wisdom, that dignity comes not from the absence of prejudice, but from the courage to confront and overcome it. Because on that morning at Horse Guards Parade, when hatred met innocence, innocence won. And a little boy's question, "Why are you being mean to someone who looks like me?" became a mirror that reflected not just one man's prejudice, but society's capacity for change. Marcus was right. Heroes do forgive. But more importantly, they inspire others to be worthy of forgiveness. Sometimes the guard who stands still teaches us patience. Sometimes the father who falls teaches us humility. And sometimes the child who questions teaches us everything. What would you do if your child's innocent question revealed an ugly truth about yourself? Would you have the courage to change like Robert Stevens did? This story reminds us that prejudice dies in the light of love, and that our children often see truths we've trained ourselves to ignore. If Marcus's bravery and his father's transformation moved you, share this video with someone who needs to hear that change is possible. Like this video if you believe in the power of innocence to overcome ignorance, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of transformation at Britain's most historic sites. Hit that notification bell to join our community of 500,000 viewers who believe that love conquers hate, one question at a time. Drop a comment below sharing a moment when a child's perspective changed your worldview. We read every story and feature the most powerful ones. Remember, it's never too late to unlearn hatred and choose love. See you next week with another extraordinary tale from the guards who stand still so we can move forward.